Hey, welcome to another exciting tutorial here at Coder Foundry. I'm Bobby Davis, the founder of Coder Foundry. And a lot of times I'm building things out around coding challenges, teaching you how to interview and how to whiteboard. And one of the things I was running into was how do you get out substrings from another string or long pieces of documents? And so we're going to show you how to solve that coding challenge. And as we were going through our method, which is we want to show you how to solve it and then learn how to talk about it and then come with a creative way to show a solution on how to use it, the show method. And in doing that, it turned into a full-blown coding project. So this is not a coding challenge per se, where it's a really simple UI, a simple solution, a one thing. This is a complete coding project. So I hope that what we're going to show today, that you'll learn a lot about arrays and you'll learn a lot about how to manage certain things inside your projects and learn some new techniques. But let's look at what we're going to build. So this is called Notary, and what we're going to do is show you what it does. So like I've got some books over here on the right hand side here, and I'm going to click this, and if you'll notice, it loads in the complete works of the complete work of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So it's the complete text in here. Pretty neat. I found this online. I also can click on Alice in Wonderland, and you can see here it's loading a full book here, and the full text is in here, and this is in text format. And Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, J.R.R. Tolkien. So it loads these books up, and if you look real closely, what it's doing is it looks into the text of this document, and it's coming out what are the most used words, like Harry 1,214 times, Ron 410 times. The least used word, squealed, was only found one time in the Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone text. And then the document stats would be 448,000, or the length. And then this is the word count. How many words are in this document? If you can guess, Lord of the Rings, being a really beefy book, has a lot more words than Sorcerer's Stone. So I found this fairly interesting. We're also going to add in another feature here, is where I can like do something right here. I'm going to look for Dumbledore because we all want to know how many times was Dumbledore mentioned in here. And it's found 160 times, and it's scrolled to the first location and it highlighted each of the found instances of Dumbledore. So that's what we're going to build. So hang with me and let's break into the code of Notary. Okay, so let's hop right in here. We're going to use Visual Studio Code, which is a code editor from Microsoft, to build out Notary, our application here. So this is VS Code, and what we're going to do is build out an HTML and a JavaScript files to support the app I just showed you. One of the things you'll notice is that we're going to do something we haven't done before. We're going to actually use Bootstrap to build out our UI. So the first part of this demo, the first part of the tutorial, is to build out the UI, or the front end for this, and then we'll build the back end with JavaScript to give us all of our functionality. And one thing that I'm using here is a plugin called Bootstrap 4, which gives me some really cool snippets that I can use real easily to build out my files. So what we're going to need is we're going to need a file, and we're going to call it index.html. So we need an HTML file. And we're also going to need a style sheet. We'll just call it style.css, and we'll use that in a second. But let's go back to our index file here. And with this plugin, allows me to do something like this. It's kind of neat. So I can just type in B. So I can type in B4, and this will give me the master template, and it just creates for me a Bootstrap boilerplate HTML page. And I can go ahead and look at, I'm going to call this Notary. Learn more about your books, and give it a title. And you can see here, I'm going to go over this real quick here, that what this did also was give me the link to the Bootstrap CSS, and it gave me all the necessary JavaScript files that I need to support Bootstrap, which is jQuery, something called popper.min.js and bootstrap.min.js. So those 3 files are included for us. We didn't have to go search them out, and they're being served up through a CDN, which means that you would need internet access for these files to be read because they're served up from a third party. If you need them locally, just go to Twitter Bootstrap and download all these files locally and place them in the folder here in your project here. But for now, we're just going to use the CDNs. And so we're going to use Bootstrap to build our UI. So all of this is going to be focused on the UI. And so what I'm going to do is show you how to build a couple of things that I used to build it out. And then we'll move on to the back end. So let's look at the app real quick again. Bring this over here. And the thing that I need you to understand real quickly is we've got a logo and we've got this thing called a card right here. And the card is what's going to contain our documents. When we click on Harry here, we can see that the card is going to be in the document. And then we also have these other things, cards on the side here. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them on the side. One's for a search, the selected book, the most least used words, and the document stats. All of this is going to be contained in one row. And this is what we call a 2-column layout. Now, the one thing you need to know about Bootstrap is that it uses a grid system, and the grid system consists of 12 columns. So everything must be in 12. So when you want to make a 2-column layout, we're going to give this an 8-column width, and then this a 4-column width, because 8 plus 4 is 12. And that's kind of how you lay it out. But let's go into the code and show you how we would actually do this in the code. So the first thing that we need to do is create a div tag, and this is called the container tag, and we're going to put this in the body. And the container tag will hold all of the HTML that we will use in this. And we give it a class, and it's called container, as you can imagine. Now, container will center our content in the page, and if we did container fluid, it would take up all available space. But we like the way it's centered on the page for now. And so we're going to put everything that we build inside this div tag, and this must be obviously inside the body tag. Now, what I'm going to do is, because the way the grid system works, I need a rows, and it's made up of rows and columns, so I need a row. And I'm just going to just real simple here. Is I'm going to create one row. If I need multiple rows, I would make multiple of these divs with the class equals row on it. So far, that's real simple. And now we're going to put everything inside the container inside this row. And so I'm going to make another div, and these are going to contain our columns. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put another class in here, and it's going to be called column. And then I'm going to do MD, and you can see here it's giving me what I need here, and that's called MD8. And MD is where it breaks, and we'll show that just in a second what that's really doing for us. But it's really column -8 is the amount of columns that'll need to take up space here. So this is going to be kind of our main content area. This is where we will see the book and where we'll see our logo. Another div tag here. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make this one column-MD-4 because we want this to be the sidebar, and it's going to take up less room on the screen. And so this is where we'll put the search widget, the most used words, the least used words, and the document stats in here. So I'm going to put a little comment in here, and I'm going to say sidebar content. Now, the reason I'm putting these comments here is because sometimes when you have like really extensive pages, it's real easy to get lost, and these comments sometimes you can scroll through and see kind of where they begin and where they end. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is I'm going to put my logo in here. And I'm going to copy some code from here, and I'm going to put it in here. I'm just going to create a quick image tag. And you can see here, this is the Notary logo, white MD, and this is what I made for the project here. Okay, so that's pretty simple. Also have a class called responsive. We'll code that up here in a second. Now the next thing I need to do is I'm going to create a card. Now a card is a control that's used inside of Bootstrap to lay out content. And the easy way to think of cards is cards have headers, cards have bodies, and cards can have or sometimes have footers. And so if you can remember that, it's real easy to remember kind of what the tags would be. So again, I'm going to make a div here. And I'm going to say class equals, and I'm just going to say card. Okay, because card is the class that I'm going to use because I want it to display that way. All right, and break it in here. So I also want to put some margin around here, and there's a lot of margin utilities inside of Bootstrap as well, and you can look these up. But this is the bottom, and I'm going to give it a 4, just to give it some space around it. Now, every card can have a header if you want, and all our cards do. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use an H tag, which is a standard HTML tag, but I'm going to put a class on it. And I'm going to say card-header. Okay? And that will style it like we saw in the app. I'm also going to give this one an ID because I'm going to reference this later in the JavaScript. I'm going to call it file name. And here it's going to say book title for our start. And so our book title will go here in this header when we select the book we want. Okay. The next thing we need to do is we need to create for the card. Now we have a card header. As remember, it has 3 components: card header and card body and sometimes card footer. So I'm going to create another class in this div, and I'm going to call this card-body. And you can see here Bootstrap's very organized, and once you know, it's real easy to lay these things out, super easy to do. Now the next thing I need to do is I need to build my viewer. So this card body will give, and I want to put the viewer inside that to display my book. And so I'm going to give that a class, and I'm going to create 2 classes here for this, and I'm going to do this right inside of our style sheets. I'm going to show you how we did this in a second, but I'm going to call them display box, and then I also have one called scroll box. I separated them just so that we can go over separate things inside of the CSS. You could put these all in one style if you wanted to. Doesn't really matter. And I'm going to give this a name too called file content because we are going to access this later on to actually write content to it from our books. And then I'm going to put some placeholder text in here, and I'm going to say select a book on the right. On the right. Okay, so what we can do here is we can now let's see what we built real quickly and see how it's kind of shaping up for us. So now we've got this white page here, and it looks nothing like what we've got going on yet, but we have our book title, and you can see here's our header, and you can see what that card header class is doing. It's giving this nice gradient gray background, and then this right here is your card body that gives you that kind of small line, and then inside that is going to be where we're going to put our scroll box and where our book will be displayed in here. Okay, so it doesn't look quite right yet, so let's add some styles in this to make it look better. And then also let's add a footer on the bottom of this because I think the footer would make it look a little cooler. Okay, and so the next thing we need to do is outside of the card body, we can add another div tag, and we can class equals, and this is just going to be card-footer, as you can imagine. And I'm going to give it another class, and this is called text muted, and it's just how the text is displayed inside the footer, which is kind of it looks kind of nice, and this is all built into Bootstrap. So the other thing that I can do is I'm going to put some content inside of this, and I'm going to put a link to the Coder Foundry website. Now, in your project, you may put whatever you want in here. Maybe a link to your portfolio or whatever you want to do. Maybe links to your social media accounts like LinkedIn or YouTube or whatever. We're just putting the Coder Foundry website to give it a placeholder so that you can kind of see what's going on here. All right. So this is how, if we look at real quick here and we look at what's going on here, now when we bring it over, we can see that we have this great footer on the bottom. We have a great book title. And in the middle, it says select a book on the right. But we're getting there, okay? So let's keep going and let's style out the page a little more, and let's jump into CSS to make this look a little bit better, okay? So the first thing you noticed, if you noticed, the first thing was the background was kind of blue and it had this really cool gradient on the background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to style up the body tag. And this is a style sheet, and this means that anytime it sees the body tag, this will it's going to put these styles on it, if you don't know anything about CSS. And what I did is I went to a place called UI Gradients, but there's a lot of places out there that that could create these gradients for you. And I just downloaded and put it in. So you can go to UI Gradients or just look for custom CSS web backgrounds, and there's like 4 or 5 sites out there that can do it for you. So let's just see what that did real quick. So if we save it, oh yeah. So the other thing that we need to do here is I also need to link this up, because you can see, hey, you know what? Nothing happened. So let's link up our style sheet right in here real quick so that we can actually see our styles will be displayed. And that's real easy by just, we'll put it right here above this other one. And it's going to be the same kind of thing here. So we're going to create a link. And we're going to say rel equals style sheet. And then we're going to say href equals style.css. And that's pretty much all we need to do there. And from here, we should be able to see, when we bring it over, and we can see now that really cool gradient is in the background, and that's from our style sheet here, this little style that we put together. So that is what I think is really cool. And now it's starting to come together, starting to look like what we did when we showed you early on. But this isn't sized right. So we're going to handle how this is sized correctly inside of CSS as well. So let's do a little bit more work in CSS here. And that will make this look a little bit cooler. Okay. So the other thing that we're going to do is I've got this class that I use a lot and a lot of the things. It's called responsive. And what I'm doing here is just, if I put this on the responsive, if I put this in the class here, I want to set the max width equal to 75%. And this is going to be applied to the image or the logo that we have. And the height is auto. And what this allows it to do is shrink with us. And I just like it to be able to shrink up and down as the browser gets bigger or smaller. And also our images in general, I like to do this sometimes where I add a little padding on the images just to give it some room to breathe. And that way images aren't just jammed together. Now a couple other things I want to do is add in my display box. And that is just a simple class that sets the width of the control to 100%. And that means it'll fill up all available space. And then I'm also going to set the font in here. And if you know this, you can load fonts in that you want if you need a specialized font. But in general, I'm going to use this one called Tahoma. But if that's not on your if it's not loaded in on your applications or on your machine or whatever, it'll default over to this sans serif. So I got Tahoma, Geneva, Fernanda, really nice kind of what we call sans serif fonts that I think look really cool. All right, and I'm going to add one more class in here called Scrollbox. Now, Scrollbox is what we're using to actually make the control scroll, because it doesn't do it by default. And so we're going to say overflow-y, or the vertical, and we're going to set that to auto, which means that it'll put a scroll bar when content overflows. We're also going to set its height equal to 500 pixels so that you don't have to read it one line at a time. And we're going to float it left. And then we'll just add a little padding around it. A little padding. And you can see now that we've got these styles put together, we can start seeing our app come together here. And you can see now it has set a height, and we've got our width in here. It's scrolled left. We've got our nice cool blue background. But now what we need to do is use our Bootstrap to lay out 5 additional cards on the side, and then we're kind of done with our UI. So let's do that real quick and see how that could work. All right, so let's head back into our index here. And what we're going to do here is add some more cards, because we're actually going to use cards for everything, because I like the way they look for this particular app. There's a lot more to Bootstrap than just cards, just to let you know. But in this case, it is pretty nice. So the first thing we need to do in our column over here is add our search widget. So I'm going to put a little comment in here. And I'm going to say search widget. Be cool if I spelled it right. All right. And we're going to say div, and we're going to say class. And it's going to be a card, so we're going to say card, just like we did the last time. And we are going to put some more margin Y4. And so now that I have this card, the next thing that we need to have is our header. So remember, it has header, body, footer, okay? And we don't always use the footer, but so I always think that it's going to have a header and it's going to have a body. All right, so I'm going to use another tag called H5, which is smaller than H2, so that the text won't be as large. And I'm going to give it the class called card-header. And close that out, and then I'm going to call it search here. All right, so now the next thing I need to do is create the card body, okay? And this is where all of it will be contained inside the card body. And again, just remember header, body, footer. And it's card-header. And after you do this a few thousand times, this becomes second nature. So a lot of this in learning how to code is just repetition and being able to do it. Okay? This should be card body. All right, so the next thing I want to do is create an input group, and so that I can style all of my my text box and my search button together. Okay, and there's a strong form support inside of Bootstrap, and this is one of those classes. So I'm going to say input group, and I just want to group all of the controls together inside of this. Now, the first thing, if you noticed, I need a placeholder, a place to type in my keywords, my search, and then my button. So to do that, I need an input box. And we'll say type equals text here. And then the next thing I want to do is give it another class. And we're going to say form control. And then I'm going to give it ID equals keyword. And what we're going to do is call it keyword, because we want to access this from JavaScript here in a few minutes. And then I'm going to give it some placeholder text. Now, what placeholder is in an input is if when you come in for the first time and there's no value entered, this will appear. So we're going to say search for ... something like that, and close it out. So I've got an input box. Now the next thing I need is my input group button, and what I want them to do is kind of go side by side. And so this will help me do that. So I need a span class equals, and then it's called input group button. Okay. It's a class built into Bootstrap. And then I'm just going to put a Bootstrap button in here. And how I do that is I give it the btn class, and then I'm also going to give it called secondary, another style that how I want it to style up. Okay, and I say type equals button. And I'm going to say search. And that's what's going to be displayed on the button. Okay? So it's pretty easy to do. Now let's scroll up and look at this to make sure we've got everything. Now the one thing that if you notice real closely too is I also had a footer on this one as well. And this showed how many matches it found. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. And I'm going to say class. And you remember it is card-footer is the name of it. And I'm going to go ahead and give it an ID, and it's going to be called search stat. And in here, I'm going to just leave it blank. I want it to appear blank when there's no search going on. And then when there is a search, it'll show how many matches it found, if it found any. Sometimes it could be 0. Okay, so that is our first little card that we did. So let's look and make sure we save everything here, and let's see if, in fact, it's working here. So let's pull it over. And you can see now that we've got Notary, our image is being kind of compressed here, and it grows with size. That's our responsive thing going on there. And now we've got our other title here, our search in our box here. So it's kind of cool. And if we expand it, it displays real nicely. If it gets really small, the MD break will stack it at the bottom here. Okay, and that's what that MD break does. So the MD is tells it when to stack, at what pixel width of the viewer does it need to stack at, and that's what it's doing. So you can see if as I get bigger, it'll unstack it and put it to the right. As it gets smaller, it'll place it vertically underneath. And this will ensure that your application or your website is responsive, so it'll work on a phone or it'll work on a big screen, however people are viewing it. And you want it to look nicely on whatever it does, or whatever screen they're using. Okay, so let's create some more content. So now remember here, we're inside this one class here, this MD4, and all of our widgets have to go in here. All right, so what I'm going to do is use this collapse thing here to collapse this down. All right, and that's kind of cool. And so now we're going to create another card. Okay, and this card is going to be for some of our stats that we're going to show. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create another comment so that we can find this real easily. And we're going to call this selected doc, select a book widget. And we'll give it a class equals, and we're going to, again, as you can guess, we're going to use cards here. So we're going to use, you'll see this kind of theme here, card, and we're going to use the same kind of spacing so that we have spacing so they don't jam right next on top of each other. And from here, we're going to create a card header, a card body. Okay. And so I'm going to say div in here, and I'm going to say class equals, and it's going to be card dash header. Actually, what I want to do is do the same thing I did before. I'm going to use an H tag here, H5, And I'm going to give it the class of card header. And then the other thing I can do is I'm going to say select a book in here. Okay. So the next thing I need to do is create another div for the card body. That's a class equals card body. Now, this is going to be a little bit different in that I am going to actually add some rows in this class here, which is kind of cool. So let's do that. So I'm going to add in some more rows in here to lay this out a little bit differently, because what I've got is I've got a list of items or a list of books that I want to put in here. Okay. And this is how you could do that. So I'm going to create another div. And this will show you that your columns and things can be nested. And so I'm going to create another row, but it's only inside of this card body, okay? Because of the way it's nested in here, okay? And if you remember, I need a 12 columns. So I'm going to go ahead and create 12 columns here. And I'm going to say column dash medium dash 12, okay? And so now I have this row with 12 columns, and inside this, I'm going to list out my 3 books, and I'm going to use something called an unordered list for this. So it's another HTML control, but I also can style it. And I'll use some Bootstrap there. And so it's list dash, and I'm going to call it unstyled. Another thing, and I'm also going to set its bottom to 0, its margin to 0. Override that a little bit. And so now I have an unordered items list, and then inside of a UL tag, you enter in LIs for each thing that you want in here. And so another HTML tag. So we're going to create 3 LIs in here, 1 for each book. Go ahead and do that. And inside this LI, we're going to have just a simple kind of href tag, an A tag. Okay. So I'm going to say A. I'm going to say href equals pound, which means don't go anywhere. Just stay where you're at. And what I'm going to do is on the click of this, I want to load my text, okay? And now we'll wire these up in a second, okay? So you need to just hang with me here. So, and then we're going to say Harry Potter. So we'll just do this part right now. And so that'll give us an A tag in there. And then what I'm going to do is create another A tag in here. Don't want it to go anywhere, so that's pound. And then I'm going to call this one Alice in Wonderland, okay? And then finally, got H tag, href equals pound. Because this link is really not going anywhere. What I want it to do is execute some JavaScript when you click on it, okay? And I'm going to call this Lord of the Rings. All right, so I think if we did it all correctly, that's pretty much all we need to do. Okay, so let's look and make sure that this is working correctly, how it looks. And if you look over here, it's now stacked 2 of them in here. If I get bigger, you can see now it's starting to lay out. So now I've got my book and I've got my 3 links in here. Of course, they don't do anything yet, and that's okay. And my search in here, and we'll code up the functionality. So we've got 3 more boxes to build here. I'm gonna build 1 more, and then you should be able to build the others after we do just 1 more. So I don't want to waste a whole lot of time doing this, because we are giving you the complete code to this. But let's build one more and then we'll move on to the JavaScript. All right, so what I want to do here is I want to collapse this again. So now I've got my search widget, my selected book widget, and what I'm going to do is create one more. And this is going to be kind of the most used words. And guess what? We're going to use a card to do this. So 3 times is the charm. You should have it down by now. And say class equals card, and I'm going to say my4, which is my margin that I want to put around it. So that's card 4. And now the next thing I want to do is create a header. So we're going to use the H5 tag so that they're all the same on the right hand side here. And we say card-header. Pretty easy. And I'm going to put most used words in here. Okay, kind of cool, right? So the next thing we need to do is add our body here. Okay, and div, and we're going to say class equals, and you guessed it, card-body. Pretty neat. And so the next thing I want to do is do the same thing I did before. Is I want to use a row, a column, and an unordered list for this. Okay. And the reason I wanted to show you this one or the other one is that this one, the list inside the unordered list, the LIs, will be dynamic. And so we'll be using a template to actually put data in here. But I just want to show you how you style this up. Okay, so now the first thing I'm going to do is some class equals, and I need a row, which is fine. And then inside this, I need a column dash medium dash 12. Okay, so that's pretty simple. And then in here, inside this one column, I need a UL tag, and I'm going to give it a class, and it's going to be the same one I did before, which is list dash unstyled. And I'm going to go ahead and set the margin to 0. And I'm going to leave this blank because what we're going to do is we're actually going to dynamically insert the LIs in here with JavaScript. In order to do that, this also will need an ID. So let's give it an ID because our JavaScript will look this up using getElementID later on. Okay, so that's our most used words widget. And so we'll just check it one more time and make sure that everything is playing nicely like we expect. Let me refresh it here, and we've got it in here. And so now we have most used words, select a book, and search. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut and paste the next boxes because they're all the same after this except for the title. Okay, no need to replicate that, and then we'll be done with our UI. And so that's the UI for Notary. So let's move over into the JavaScript where we can start making this work and making Notary all the functionality we showed you earlier on in the show. All right. So now that we've made the UI, let's jump into the code and start actually programming the functionality we need for Notary. So the first thing that we need to do here is we're going to create a new JavaScript file, and we're going to call this searchstring.js. And this JavaScript file is where we're going to actually write the code to do a lot of the functionality that we need for Notary. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is let's wire it up to the front end. Let's go ahead and do that so that we can actually reference this thing. And so like if I go up here to the top here, I'm going to just add in a script here called searchstring. So don't forget to do that if you're trying to follow along. So it's searchstring.js is kind of right here. And so the next thing we need to do is let's go ahead and write a new function. And this new function is going to be called load book. Okay, so we're going to say load a book from disk. And we're going to say function load book. And this function we know, or I know, it's going to take a file name. And so the file name is what we're going to use to actually find the file that we're interested in. And we're also going to pass it the display name. And this is what we want to put, that we want to appear on the header in the viewer that we just finished writing. Okay? So let's create a couple of variables, and we're going to call this one current book. We'll set it equal to empty string. Now this current book is going to hold all of the characters as we read the file off disk, and then we'll use this to display it in the viewer that we wrote. We also need a URL, and a URL we're going to use in our server-side function to access the actual text file that we need. Okay, so what we're going to do is we need to create a folder in here to store our books. Okay, so let's do that real quick. So I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this books. Now inside this books, I am going to place in all of the books that I've been using in my samples so far that you've seen today. So let me grab those off my disk here, and we'll just copy them over there. So I'm going to just drag them into this folder, and you can see here we've got Alice in Wonderland, Harry Potter, and Lord of the Rings text files. Okay, as we mentioned, we'll give you Loader and Alice in Wonderland. If you want to find Harry Potter, you can. It's online in other places. So now that I've got the books on disk, this is where I'm going to read these files with my code and then stream them back to my browser. So we'll explain a little bit more what's going on here as we go. So let's create a URL, because we're actually going to use an HTTP request to get to it. And so our URL is going to look like this: books / and then we're going to add in the file name that's coming in. And that's our URL. Okay. Now, before we load in our book, what I want to do is also reset our UI, because if we're clicking from book to book, I want to reset the display and put it back to a beginning state. And so how we're going to do that is I'm going to use our familiar document .getElement by ID, and I'm going to look up a couple things, which is file name. And you remember we named our controls, gave them IDs when we were building our front end, and we're going to set the inner HTML of this file name equal to our display name that's being passed in. Okay, and so that'll give us a new document name. Okay, and then we're going to say getElement by ID, and then we're going to look at this other element that we called search stat. Now search stat holds how many items were found when we do a search, and so when I load a new document, I want to set that to empty string. So if I had a value there before of a previous search, it won't make sense anymore. And so now what I want to do is reset it up to empty. And I'm going to do one final cleanup here, and I'm going to say getElement by ID. And in here, I want to reset the keyword. So if I had a keyword like Dumbledore, like I showed you before, what I want to do is clear that out. And I'll set that to empty string. So that kind of resets our UI every time we load a new book. So every time they click on a new link, the UI will get reset. Okay. So now what we want to do is we want to create a server request to load our file, to load our books. Now, one thing I want to talk to you real quickly is these documents right over here are actually on a server. So and even though I'm running this out of a folder in my on my desktop here, if I publish this to a web server, these files would exist on the server. They're not on the local computer per se. So accessing files from the server is different than accessing files that are local to the user in the web browser. These will actually be streamed back to the browser. So what we're going to use is something called an HTTP request to grab it, and this is how you do that. So I'm going to create a new variable. We're going to call it XHR, and that stands for, and we can create a new XML HTTP request. Now, you may think that this only brings back XML. That's not true. This can bring back a lot of files. We're going to use this to stream back a text file to us. So the XML HTTP request will create a request for us, and then we need to open it. So when we say open, now open does a couple of things, but it doesn't do what you think it might do. It doesn't open the request or open a connection just yet. It just kind of initializes it or sets it up. So we're going to use this as a GET. This could be another type of request, but for today we're just going to go use a GET, and then we're going to use the URL that we described up here. You can see that up here. So this will be books/ maybe harrypotter1.txt, and then we're going to set this to true, which means that we're going to run this asynchronous, which that means that it'll be a fire, and then it'll come back and it won't lock up our UI. So we will run this as an asynchronous request on a different thread. Now, to initiate network traffic, we use this command called send. And that's the basis of how we go and grab a file from the server and bring that back to us. Okay? Now, what we need to do as well is we need to also check to see if it's completed, because this is happening asynchronous, and so we want to know when this is actually done. So we're going to use an anonymous function to do this, and we're going to use an event that's fired by the XML HTTP request object on ready state change. And that means every time something changes about this request, it's going to fire this anonymous function, which is just a function with no name, not hard. Okay. Now inside this function, we need to do a couple of things. Okay. So I'm going to write an if statement here, and what I'm really looking for is when this is complete, or when are we done. So we can also check something called ready state. Now ready state tells me what is going on with this particular request, and ready state has four numbers that it can have: 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 0 means that it is unsent, and 1 would mean that the document or the file is now open, and 2 means that it's received headers or it's got information about the request. 3 means it's actually loading the file back, and 4 means I am done. And so when we get to ready state 4, that's when we want to do some things. That means that the load from the file is actually complete. I also want to check in another status, and I want to check the HTTP status, which is just status, and I want to make sure that this is successful. So XR status equals 200, which means okay, this transaction is okay, or this request is okay. And so we're looking to see, is it complete, and was it an okay transaction? And when those are happening, and when that's done, that means that we can load our variable, and we can say, give me the response text. Or actually, what it is the contents of the file that you just read. Give it to me, and I'm going to put it in this variable. So now I've read the file from disk and stored it into this variable called current book here. And if you can imagine, what I can do next is I can go ahead and set that to my control in my website. So I'm going to say get element by ID, and if you remember, it's called file content was the name that we gave the control. And here I can set the inner HTML equal to current book. And now we've successfully loaded the file from disk over here from the server, and now we have streamed it back through HTTP and placed it in our website dynamically and changed the inner HTML content of that. And we'll show you how that works in just a second. But we're going to do one more thing to make this kind of nicer, a little bit nicer. And so what I want to do here is every time I load a document, I want to scroll to the top of it. So like, let's say that I was reading Harry Potter and I was on chapter 3 or whatever, and then I decided, hey, you know what, I want to go look at Alice in Wonderland. I don't want the cursor to stay in the same spot. I just want to scroll back to the top. So what I can do here is I'm going to get the file content control, and I'm going to set it to a variable called element. I could have done this in one statement, but I did it in two just to give you some clarity on how this works. And once I have that control, I can also have other properties, and I'm going to call this scroll top equals 0. And what that'll do is just scroll the viewer to the top. And that is it. That will load our document. Okay, so to wire this up, we also need to go ahead and wire this up to our front end. So let's make a couple of changes in our front end here as well. And I'm going to scroll down here and find our book widget. And this is why I use those comments so I can find it really easy. And you see right here, I've got this A tag. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an on-click event that will load the doc here. And so the first thing I'm going to do is write this as on-click, create a function. If you've been following along, it's pretty easy for us to do. And we're going to call this load book. And where we got this from, just to clarify, is from this function. We want to call this function when everyone clicks on that link. Okay? And we know that it takes two parameters, which is a file name, and it also takes a display name. So inside this, we want to call the file name that we want to use. And if you notice, this one's going to be Harry Potter 1, because that's the actual name on this that it needs to look for. And then we want to give it a display name. We'll just say Harry Potter. Okay. All right, now so we need to also wire up the other two here. Same thing. And we'll call it load book. And this one we're going to load Alice in Wonderland, and remember it is Alice in Wonderland.txt. So we'll go Alice in Wonderland.txt, and then we'll give it a display name of Alice in Wonderland. Okay, and then we'll do one more here. We'll say onclick load book. And this one's going to be called loader.txt. And then the next thing we'll do is comma, and we'll say Lord of the Rings. The Rings is our display name. Okay, we'll save that. So now this should be ready to roll here. Okay, so let's see what happens here. Let's pull this over here. So we've got our page loaded up here. And I'm going to click on a link here, see what happens. And look, it loaded the book. And so let's see if it's going to change here. Alice in Wonderland and Lord of the Rings. Now, you may notice, you're probably thinking, hey, you know what? That doesn't quite look like what you showed me in the beginning. What's going on here? What kind of tutorial is this? So let's talk about text files and what's actually going on here. So in text files, you do have things called carriage returns and line feeds, and that's represented inside a text control as /r/n. When you push that to the browser, it doesn't recognize those at all. In fact, it will just escape out of them or get rid of them, and it'll load it as one continuous blob of string. So none of the line breaks can be seen in this. So we need to fix this and parse this file and clean it up a little bit. And it's real simple to do. And let me show you kind of how we would do that. Okay? So we'll go back over to our JavaScript, and we're going to use something called a regular expression. Okay, and regular expressions are extremely powerful and a little bit of a mystery to a lot of people. And I don't want to turn this tutorial into like a whole course on regular expressions. So I'm just going to show you the one I use to do this, and maybe we'll come back with a tutorial that covers regular expressions more detail. But the problem is the carriage returns and line feeds aren't recognized by the browser, and so we need to replace those with a BR tag. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the current value or current book, and then I'm going to call a replace method, and I can do it because it's a string. And these replace methods take regular expressions. Okay, and this is going to look kind of funky, but the cool thing about regular expressions is they're very well documented, and you can find just about any kind of regular expression you need on the internet. Okay, but in general, this is going to look for every occurrence of carriage return line feed, or just a carriage return, or just a line feed. Okay, and when it sees those, it's going to replace that with an HTML tag, and it's called BR. And so this statement right here is looking for carriage return line feed combinations, or just a carriage return, or just a new line. And then this /G here is saying, do this globally. Look in the entire document and replace every occurrence of it with a BR tag. Okay, now we want to do this, about made a mistake here, before we set it to our HTML. So we want to do it first. Now let's see kind of what happens here when we do it. So I save my file, and watch what happens. Magic. See how it formatted everything? So everywhere where there was a carriage return and line feed, it's now replaced that with an HTML tag called BR, which is a breaking tag. And it formatted the document just like it was in text. And you can see here, if we click on the little rings, it was a really long string, and now it has all this really nice formatting. It's a lot easier to read. So we solved one kind of problem with loading text files, and just our knowledge of text files, which is text files are formatted with carriage returns and line feeds. Replace that with an internet or a HTML equivalent of a breaking tag. So that solved a problem there. So that's kind of cool. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is, how do we fill out these stats? What can we do next? Okay. So let's put this to the side for a second. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to take care of some UI elements that we're going to do. So if you remember, when I created the front end for this, I was going to use a template inside the LI element. So if you look through here, I'm going to dynamically insert LI elements. Like this one has some hard-coded ones. I'm going to dynamically insert the least used words using LIs, as well as the top 5 or the most used word with LI elements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a template to do that. So to do that, I'm going to use a script tag. I'm going to copy my template over here. Just going to go through it real quick. So I created a script tag, and it's called template-ul-items. This is the ID that JavaScript will use to identify this template. And then I gave it this text-template as a type. Now this is important for this to work, so that the browser will ignore the script tag because it's an unknown type. And then in here, I've got my template, which is li with the bracket val. and then another li. So I want all of this, and I'm going to dynamically put my word in here with its count and then iterate over it and make a bunch of LIs in here. So that's how that's going to work. So this is the template that I'm going to use for that. Set it up in my front end. Okay, so let's go back to JavaScript and let's start writing our code to be able to get this. Now this is a little lengthy, so stay with me but I think there's a lot to learn here. So I'm going to write my function called getDocStats. And this function will pretty much do a lot of the work. And so let's call it getDocStats. All right. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pass the file content in here as our current book in this, and that's going to take that as a parameter. Okay. So it's going to just get the stats for the book. Let me scroll up here so we can see what we're doing here. All right, so first thing I want to do is go ahead and get a couple of variables called doc. I'm going to call this one doc length, and that's going to be the total length of the document. And it is just an HTML element I'm going to grab using getElementById. And that's called doc length. Those are these hard-coded ones that I put in there that I just showed you. And so I'm going to get all three of them here. Another one's called word count. And that's word count. And then I'm going to get char count. All right, and that equals same thing, document. If I could spell today. Same thing here. And that's char count. Now if we go check our HTML here, we'll notice that I called it doc length, word count, and char count. So I got these three LIs, and I'm just going to put those counts in there. Okay. All right. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to go ahead and grab our and start working with the text that we have. So I'm just going to call this thing text, and I'm going to say file content dot, and I'm going to convert it to lower. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start counting all the words in this. So I'm going to be case insensitive. I think the word's the same whether it's capitalized or not. I'm going to convert everything in the document to lowercase. And then what I want to do is to give me an array of individual words. So how I can do that is using something called a regular expression. Now we've used those before. So I'm going to say text dot, and I'm going to use this method called match. All right. And match will return a, based on a regular expression, will return things to me. And I'm going to paste in a regular expression here and then go over it for you. So what this is doing here, and I want to be real clear, what I want you to do in this video is I don't want us to get hung up on regular expressions. This is something that is knowable, and there's entire websites devoted to regular expressions, and they can get quite complex. The purpose of this is to show you kind of that they exist and how you might use them and solve certain cases. But there's a regular expression for almost anything. And so what this one does is it looks for spaces, these slash b's, and then characters in between any two spaces. And it's going to assume that that's a word. And then I'm going to do that globally through here. So that'll return all of the words, individual words, into an array. Okay? So that is what that does. And so now I'm going to create something called a word dictionary. And that is looking like this. And a dictionaries technically don't exist in JavaScript. This is technically an object, but we're going to treat it like a dictionary. We're going to do dictionary-like things to it. So objects are very dynamic. So what I thought I would do is kind of with some slides here, detail the differences between these two, because I think it's very important to understand kind of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how it actually looks internally. So hang with me and let's look at a couple of slides in PowerPoint so maybe we can get some more clarity on like what's actually going on. So I've got a slide here, and I thought I would just go over some definitions real quick. I normally don't do this, but I think it's worth noting if you're just trying to learn and you're trying to understand what's going on here. I thought I would tell you the difference between an array and an object real quickly in terms of this program and show you how I'm using it. So the first thing you need to understand is an array holds multiple values that can be accessed via an index. So if you look at arrays and debuggers or whatever, you'll see that they all have indexes. And at index 0, the value is Harry. Index 1, the value is Potter. Index 2, the value is and index 3, the value is the. And index 4, it's sorcerers, and index 5 is stone. Okay? So in the case here, we're showing you the first 6 letters in the array, in our word array. Okay? And so the index, you got to understand, starts at 0. The length of this array that's just been displayed here is 6. But the last index is 5, and that's real important. Remember, the one thing that confuses a lot of people, they think they start at 1, they actually start at 0, and so the length of the array or the last index is array length minus 1. Okay, so that's what that's the array. So if we look at our code, go back to our code here. What I've done here is that this text.match will return an array of words, and we're saying a word is defined by if it has a space on any consecutive characters, has a space on either side, we're going to assume that is a word. So that'll give us our word array, and then now we're also going to get a dictionary, and our dictionary we're going to use to count them. So you may be asking yourself, what is a dictionary? Okay, and that's a good question. So let's go back to our PowerPoint here, and let's go to the next one. So the dictionary is a little bit different than an array in that it holds multiple key value pairs, and the key is defined by us, and so our key is going to be the words in the array, and the value is going to be the count of the words. So what we're going to do is we're going to loop over this array, and every time we see the word Harry, we're gonna add 1 to the count. And when we see Potter, we're gonna add 1 to its count, and so forth, so that we end up with an object or a dictionary that holds the value is the count and the key is Harry. And that means we can look it up by the word and get its value or the number of times it appeared in the document. So that's pretty cool. All right, so let's do that part first, and then we'll come back and finally show you one other piece, how we're going to use arrays here. Okay, so let's go back to the code, and let's keep typing. So let's keep coding here because it's getting kind of fun. Now there is a lot of work to do here, so just stay with me. So like you said, I want to count every word in the array, in the word array. I want to count every word in the word array. And so this is how I'm going to do that. So what I can do is I can write a for loop, and I can loop over this array, and every time I see a word, I can increment its count. And this is how you would do it. So I'm going to say let word in word array. Okay, so I'm checking its value and not its index. All right, a little bit different. And so what I can do is say let the word value, the current word, equal, and I'm going to say word array, and I'm going to say at the value of word. Okay, so give me that word value. All right, so that's going to be the index, and say if, and watch this, it's pretty neat. If word dictionary and and I can pass it the word value. So this is the actual word. Okay, word is the index. Okay, and what this statement does, it'll look for it. And if it finds it, it will return something greater than 1. It'll return 1. So I'm going to say, you know what? If you do find it, if it's greater than 0, do some stuff. And what I want it to do is I want to set the count higher. So word value, so I'm looking in this dictionary, which means I've already found this. I know that it exists, and I want to set its value 1 higher. Okay, so that's plus equals 1. So that's basically incrementing the count or the value in this dictionary. Okay, now you're probably wondering, well, how did it get in there? And this is how we got it in there. If this is 0 or -1 or something less than, it's not greater than 0, then it's going to add it. Okay, and I'm going to add 1, and I'm going to just say the word value, and I'm going to set it equal to 1. Pretty cool. And what that will do is add it to this dictionary every time it finds one, and keep incrementing over the value of it every time it finds that Harry mentioned more than once. So the second time it'll run right here and add 1 to the value. The first time it would have went here and just added to the dictionary and set its value equal to 1. Okay, so that's kind of what it does. So that's how we counted every word. Okay, so now that we've got all the words counted, what I want to really get after is I want the top 5 words and the least used words. Okay, so what I need to do is actually sort this word array from the most used word to the least used word. And it's really easy to take the top 5 and the bottom 5 and to get our list. But we need to sort it first. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a function that sorts this for me. Okay, so I'm going to say function sort properties. Okay, and what's cool about this function is you actually could use this on almost anything. Okay, so I'm going to pass it this object word dictionary. So I want to sort this dictionary, and I want to return it as an array. Okay, so that's kind of cool. All right, so it's going to be called sort properties, and let me change this up to make it a little bit more generic. All right, so I'm going to call this object. So like it's really object, it's not the word dictionary, so that you could reuse this on another project. Okay, so the first thing we have to do in order to sort these is I have to return my object as an array. Remember, they're kind of different. Okay, so the one is key value, one has an index of values, and so I'm going to say return first convert the object to an array. Okay, and I'm going to show you real quick what's actually going to happen here. So I'm going to say I'm going to need a return array, and I'm going to set that equal to, and I'm going to use this object keyword here, or interface object, and then I'm going to call this method called entries. And this one line of code here is doing what we need, and I pass that our object. And what that does is that will return an array to us. Okay, so it converts it to an array, and then we just need to sort it. Now we've covered sorting before, and so it's really easy to sort arrays. But if you need to do it by value and not by alphabetically, then there's a little bit more work to do, but it's a common pattern, so we call the sort method. But since I want it to sort numerically, I need to pass it a function, a comparer function. And this is a pattern that you can use on any of these. And it looks like this. All right, and let's see, let's get it back here. Get us set up right here. And then I just basically, inside this compare function, I have a real simple method here that returns them sorted. Okay, so I'm doing this based on value. And so let me show you real quick why this works, because there's actually two values in this array now. So let me go back to my PowerPoint here and show you kind of what happened here. So when we returned that statement with the object.entries, it created an array for each value. So now we have multiple values, okay? And so it's holding multiple key values. So like it does have an index of 0, but Harry, comma 1214 now is an array in the value. And I can access this value with an index of 0, which would be Harry, or the count would be 1. So if you look at what's going on here in the code, that's exactly what we're doing. So now we're comparing the one beside it to see if it's larger or smaller and returning that in a sorted method. So that's kind of what it does. So that sorts this properties, and now we have this array that we can use, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. If not, leave us a comment. We would love to talk to you, interact with you, and help you on your learning journey. But for now, we're just sorting this array by its value, okay? And that's what we want. So let's call it. Oops, almost forgot here. We do need to return the return array. Wouldn't work. Okay, glad I caught that. All right, so what I can do is I'm going to set the word list equal to, and I'm just going to call my sort properties, and I'm going to pass it my word dictionary. Okay, so this method will call this code that we just wrote that sorts the array and sorts our object and returns an array of that object with the array in the second value. Okay, so now that they're sorted, it's real easy to get the top 5 words. So we're going to go do that. And so I can say var top 5 words equals, and then I'm going to say word list, and that's that value up there, dot slice. And so slice is a method that we can call. And then we have a start number and an end, and we're going to start at 0, and we're going to go for 6. All right. And then I can get a var and get the least 5 words. We'll do something very similar. Word list dot slice, and it's going to give me a start. And so I'm going to do something a little cool here. I'm going to say I'm going to start the -6, which is starting from the end. Okay. Stop at the end. Okay. So it backs up from the end, it gives me -6, and then it's going to go to the end, which will give me the bottom of the array. So that should work for us. Make sure I spell everything right here. Okay. So that should work. So let's just put a little comment here. All right, kind of cool, right? So the next thing we want to do is we want to write them to the page. So one of the things that we have to do is I need to use that template that I set up in the beginning of this. So we need to write one more function, and we're going to just call it a UL template. So we're going to use our template to we're going to implement our template here. So look, I'm going to call it UL template. So one more function here, and we're almost got the payoff here. What we're going to pass it is the items. In our case, the top 5 or at least 5 words, at least the bottom 5 words, the top 5 words, and then the element we want to write to, which is the UL element we're going to grab from the document. Okay, so let's get our row template, and that equals document dot get element by ID, and that's going to be template dash UL dash items, and that's what I called it. We'll check this to make sure that we're right. And then what I need to do is I need to be able to get the template HTML, which is like the inner piece of this. So let's look at this. So what that gave me is this whole thing, okay? Template.URL. And what I really want is this, which is the inner HTML of template UL items, okay? So that will allow me to say template, and I'm going to call it HTML, equals document dot get element by ID. Actually, I don't need to do that. I need to just get my row template here. Dot inner HTML. Okay, so I could do that in one statement, but I wanted to break it up to show you kind of what's going on here. Misspelled function, we got it taken care of. All right, so we need one last thing, and we're going to create a string that will hold the results, because what we're going to do is loop over this items and create a bunch of LIs, or list items. So that's going to start out as empty string, and so what we need to do is just write a loop. Pretty simple at this point. You've written loops before. We're going to start at 0, and then we'll go to I less than items dot length -1. Okay, and then semicolon. Having a bad day typing. And then every time it loops over, we want to add 1 to I. Okay, so we got this loop here, and we just want to do a one-liner here. Results HTML plus equals, which we're going to add to it on every loop. And we're going to take the template HTML and we're going to replace its value. Okay? So, and we'll call this replace function, and we're going to look for the search value, and then we hit comma, and then what we want to replace it with. But our search value, the thing we're looking for, is this, our template item. It's a bracket, val. Okay? So then I just hit comma, and this is where this will begin to make sense on why we converted it to this other array out of the object. Okay, so I want to access the items in the array, and this is normally how you access arrays. I'm going to get the array at index I, and then this new array that we have actually has 2 values in the value. It's an array in the values, and I can get the first value in position 0. In the case, it would be the name. So let's look at PowerPoint just to remind you real quick. And so what we're doing here is we're going to index 0, and then we're going into this array, and at index 0 we're getting the name, and at index 1 we will get the count. So hopefully that becomes clear now. That's when we see it in action. So let's get back to our code. So what I can do is here is, and then I'm going to add a plus. I'm going to just format this a little bit. And so I'm going to have the Harry colon and then the count. Okay. So, and then I'm going to add a plus here, and then I'm going to go items again. I'm getting the same row, index I, the same row, but this time I'm getting a different position in the value, which is position 1, which would be the count. Okay? Plus add another thing called times, and we'll put a parenthesis around it because it could be once. All right? And then we just terminate that line. So that is pretty much all we got to do almost. But let's check our code here. All right, and then finally we take our element that we passed in and we set its inner HTML equal to the results HTML. And hopefully we did everything right. All right, so let's go back up here. And now that we've wrote our function to use our template, let's actually call it. And then we'll be ready to kind of like check it out here and see what we can do. So let's call UL template. And I want to pass it the first time, top 5 words. And then I want to pass it the element I want to use, which we grabbed up here. Well, I haven't grabbed that yet. So we'll have to go out to the document. And it's called most used. All right, that looks correct. Let's call it one more time. And you can see how functions here grant you a lot of reusability when you use them. And so that's another thing that I'm hoping as you're learning that the value of functions is really powerful, that I only have to write this code once. And I'm going to pass it least used. Okay, so I need to go ahead and check my index here and make sure that's what I called it. So least used and most used. So what we're going to do is we're going to write right here a bunch of LIs in here because we're using this as our template, and we put the value Harry : 1214. We make a new one, and it'll be LI, 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 and it'll run down there. And so it'll just get dynamically inserted between these two ULs. So that's kind of cool, I think. Okay, there's one more thing we actually need to do here before this will work, is we need to actually call this function called getDocStats. So if you remember earlier in the program, we grabbed this book from the server. And so what I need to do is I need to call the docstacks function, getDocStats function. And so one of the things that I want you to think about is, when do I want to call this? And I want to call this right after I get my response text, because we actually alternate down here, down the bottom here, and I want to go ahead and get the stats before it gets altered. Okay. So getDocStats, and just pass it the current book. Okay, and we save that, and this should call the method right here and go through all that work we just did. So let's see if that works, in fact. Okay, so we got the app over here, and let's check it out and see what it's doing, what's going on here. So click on Harry Potter, and you notice it loaded in our things there. Now it's not formatted correctly. We can address that, but you noticed how if you're being really sharp here, you notice that I had Harry as the top word at 1214, and this is showing the word the. And so what the is what I'm going to call a noise word, and it's not entirely relevant to the most used word. Okay, what I want is the most used non-noise words, okay, or uncommon words. And so the, and, to, a, and he are very common words that you would think in any book this would be the result. So we can check that by going to Alice in Wonderland, and look, the is used the same thing. And we can go to Lord of the Rings, and the is the top word. So that's not really what we want. We want to have the most uncommon word. So let's show you what we would do to fix that. And we'll fix this formatting too while we're at it. Okay, so the thing that we can do here is, let me go back here and let's fix our formatting here. We need a little space right here. We'll just add a little space while I'm thinking of it. So what we can do is we can create a list of or stop words or noise words. I think stop words is what you'll see on the internet. So I actually had to look this up. So I didn't know this, by learning something while doing this. And so I'm going to write another function called get stop words. Okay. And these were just copied from a site. And I wrote it as a function to return. Okay. So if you look in here, these are a list of stop words we don't want to include in the stats. I didn't make this list up. Again, you can write in stop words or noise words. And in English, if you want to support multiple languages, that would be a more complex solution. Or if you need a dialects or whatever, there's lists out for that as well. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to concentrate on English. And these are the stop words we're going to filter out of the words that we've got out of our book. Okay, so let's start doing that. It's not too difficult, but it'll take us a few seconds here to do it here. So I'm going to go scroll up, and the first thing I'm going to do is in my dictionary here, right before my dictionary, I don't want to count words that I'm going to filter out. So this is kind of where I want to filter it first. It'll make my algorithm here a little bit more efficient if I only count the words that I want to count. So there's no reason to count them if I'm just going to go out and remove them. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to call these uncommon words. Okay, and it's going to be an array. We'll just call it uncommon words. Okay, so I'm going to set it up as an array. And let's do this. Yeah, that looks good. All right. So I'm kind of debating that. Sorry. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to filter out these words. Okay. So I'm going to filter out the uncommon words. And I'm going to use this array that I just cut and paste in there that I found. And so I need to kind of filter out the stop word. So I'm going to use a function to do this in case you wanted to do this on more than one list at one point in time. Okay, so I'm going to write a new function here, and we'll call it filter stop words. Okay, and this will be pretty easy to do. It's not too terribly difficult, so hang with me. I think it's worth it. It's pretty cool what we're going to do here. Write a couple of loops, and we're done. All right. So I'm going to create a variable called common words, and these are the ones that we want. We have common words, and we're going to set that equal to that get stop words. The reason I used two functions here is that I was thinking that I may have to replace this array at some point, and so I just figured out that it's a good place to abstract what the actual get stop words here. If you need to implement language or something like that down in here, you could do that. Otherwise, I could have just put the array right in here, but I thought it would be a good spot to kind of like make it a little bit more abstract from it. So and then so I'm going to make a common object. So we've been using objects today. Okay, and then I'm going to make the uncommon array, and these are the words that we're looking for. Not the droids, but the words. All right, so so what I want to do is I want to take these common words and I want to put them into the object. Okay, so I'm going to do that with a for loop. And again, should be real used to doing this by now. So I equals from start at 0, less than length, and then I plus plus. Okay, there we go. So how I can add it is I can just check to see if it's there, and if it's not, it'll add it. So I'm going to take my common object, and I'm going to set its value and it's going to be common, and then I'm going to look for the I, the index. And what I want to do is I want to trim these up just in case. So I added a little trim statement here just to make sure, and that trims the leading and trailing spaces off of it. And just set a little value equal true. And so it'll add this if it doesn't find it. So now I have a common object with all the stop words in it. And now what I can do is compare, I can filter my array. So what I want to do is write another loop. I equals 0, comma. And I want to go to the word array length. Okay, so I passed in the word array, and I forgot to do that. So I actually need the word array here. So the word array is the book. The books of the individual words we found in the book. Okay, and I want to say less than the word array dot length. Okay, semicolon I plus plus. So we're going to loop over this like we've been doing a lot. All right. So I'm going to grab a word. So I'm going to say word array. I'm going to go to the index that we're currently at. I'm going to go ahead and trim it, okay, just in case. And I'm going to go ahead and convert it to lowercase because I don't care about the case sensitivity. I just want to see if the word exists in there. Okay. So that gives me the current word. Okay. All right, so now I can just do this real simple statement. If not, and that's what this bang means, not. If I don't find this at the common object. So I can pass, again, you remember objects, we look up, we have our own key value pairs, and that key for us is the actual word. I can say if it's not found, okay, then I want to go ahead and push it, this word, into our uncommon array. I want to add to the array. I'm going to use push, and then word. Okay, so now what it's going to do is it's going to push all of the unique words or uncommon words into this array. Okay, and what I just effectively did is just, hey, check to see if this is and or the or something, don't push it. If it's Harry, push it. And then I just return my uncommon array. And that's how you filter a list of arrays. So if you ever had the coding challenge, say, hey, I've got a list of words, I want to filter out some words, this filter stop words would allow you to do that. So the thing is you add it to an object, and then you check that object value against the value in the array. Pretty simple. And this is filter out stop words. I do believe this could be a coding challenge in the future, so that's how you would do it. Hopefully you hung around to get that nugget. So let's look what else we have to do here. So we've wrote our filter out, and so now let's call our filter. So almost done here. We've almost got this. So what I got is I've got my uncommon words, okay, and I'm going to set that equal to, all right, filter stop words, and I'm going to pass in my word array. Cool. All right, so now I'm gonna have to change up my my stuff down here. Okay, so I'm gonna use word or uncommon words here, and then I'm just gonna loop over those now, and I'm just gonna change it. Before I was looping over the common or all the words. Now it's just the uncommon words. Okay, so just make those couple of little changes. And now what should happen is it should change the way of what's displayed on the screen. So we don't have to change any of this. We just basically filtered out our list before we sorted it and before we displayed it. Okay, so let's look at, let's go live here and let's see if it worked. Okay, so let's try it out here, and it did not work. Okay, let's look at our code over here to see what the problem is. Oh, okay. So, made a typo. So really what we want to do here is we want to go to common words. So what we need to do here is kind of make some changes here. So I made a couple of mistakes. So it's really common words length. And this is going to be common words here. And I think that's all we need to do. We hope. Let's try that out. So let's pull it over here. Let's click on Harry Potter. And there we go. So now we have Harry, Ron, out, and up. And you notice now we filtered it out because we don't have the and all the common words or the stop words or the noise words. And so we filtered that out. So that's pretty cool. So now the last thing we need to do is add our document stats down here at the bottom. So let's do that real quick. And that's pretty easy to do because we actually already have everything that we need. So let's go up here to our function, which is our get.stats function. Let's write two more statements here. So I'm going to get the doc length, and I'm going to set the dot length. It's inner text. And I'm not going to use HTML for this. And I'm just going to put a thing in here called document length space plus. And what we're going to do is, remember when we got our text right here, we're going to use this variable to get these counts here. So I'm going to say text dot length. And that's just going to get us the length of the document, which is the thing that we want. And let me put a colon in that, make it look a little better. And then I'm going to set my word count dot inner text equals, and then we'll just do word count. Put a space here. And we're just going to say text. And actually here we're not using the text. We actually want to use the word array length. Okay, so that's where we got our individuals from here. So it's word array dot length. And that'll give us how many words and how long our actual document is. Okay, so if we pull back our function, let's go live here. I gotta kill my browser. Okay, let's see what it's going to do here. And we've got our loaded, we've got our most used words here, and we've got our document stats in here. So there's one thing left to do, and we notice here if we check it with Alice and Lord of the Rings. So let's code up the search and the highlight of the search times, and then we'll be done. So let's code up the search, and what we need to do first is let's just jump into the code here, And we're going to write one more JavaScript function to do the search function out here. So let's try that out. Move this over here. Close this down. So what I want to do is I want to write a function, and I'm going to call it perform mark. And what we're going to do is mark the document up and insert HTML into the document. And we're also going to remove the other values as we mark them. So a little bit of work here, but not too awful bad. I'm going to say mark the highlighted, mark the words in the search. And we'll see this highlight. Okay. So just to show you, this is going to work on one keyword. There are other methods that you could do to look at phrases or multiple words and things like that. So just know that that's something that we could improve on this, but I'll just show you in general how this kind of works. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is read the keyword. And I'm going to say var, I'm going to say keyword, and that's going to equal, and I'm going to go ahead and grab it from our document like we've been doing. And the one we're looking for, we called it, if you remember, keyword, and I need the value from that. And then the next thing I need to do is go ahead and get display. And that's document. And we're just going to get the book here. ID, and we'll call it file content. All right. And so, and then we need to say, set something equal to, let's call it new content. So we're going to mark it up. And it's kind of bad here, right? All right, that's not a colon, semicolon. So the first thing we want to do is I want to find all of the currently marked items. And so we're going to use a new selector that we haven't been using here in any of our things. And so I'm going to say, I'm going to look for spans, okay? And we'll call it spans equals document dot, and then I'm going to use this method here. It's called query, and then I'm going to say selector all. And then I'm going to pass it the name of the item I'm looking for. So in this case here, we're going to look for a mark tag in here. So it's going to say all of the tags by the name of mark. So how this will look in our code here, it's going to look for tags like that would look like this. Okay, and so it's going to find these two things and whatever's the inner HTML inside of that. Okay, and it's going to return it as an array or a node list of nodes here that we can loop over and do stuff with. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to write a quick for loop, and I want to loop over these because I want to unmark anything that I find at this point, and I'm going to show you how we can unmark them. Hopefully you'll find this enlightening. I thought it was pretty cool. So like we've been writing before, we've done enough for loops today, so we should know that we're going to the length. We want less than the length, and we're going to go one by one, so it's going to be I plus plus. Okay, so no need to explain a loop again. Okay, we're going to start at 0, and we're going to go through all of them, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to say spans, and I'm going to say I dot outer HTML equals spans sub I dot inner HTML. Okay. Now, if you understood that, that's great, but if you didn't, let me explain it to you. Okay. So let's say that we put in the word Harry in our markup here. What that's going to do is outer HTML would be this, okay? Inner HTML would just be Harry. What this does is it takes this string here and makes it this. Whoops. And turns it into just Harry and essentially removes the mark. So that unselects everything. Okay? So I thought that was a pretty cool way to undo that. Now what we need to do is I'm going to make another regular expression here. And I'm going to use another keyword just to show you how other ways we can make these. And I have this function called regular expression. And I'm going to pass it the keyword, the thing that the person entered on the search box. And then I'm going to put some extensions on this, and it'll format and create it for me, so I don't have to worry about the /GI or whatever. But GI means global, and I means case insensitive. So look globally, and I don't care about what the case is. So if I'm looking for Harry Potter, I don't care if it's a lowercase Harry or an uppercase Harry. Okay, I look at those as the same words. And then I'm going to do something with this. I'm going to create another variable called replace text. And I'm going to set that equal to this mark. And this is where I'm going to mark it up. So I'm going to create a mark tag. And I'm going to give this mark tag an ID, which is important. And I'm going to call it mark me. And then I'm going to close this off here. And inside this replace tag, I'm going to put this little statement here, $ and @ Okay? And then I'm going to hit a semicolon. Now what that allows me to do is when I call this with replace, it's going to take the current content and stick it in the middle in between these. And that's what that's doing for me. But you can Google this and look it up. I just want you to know it's available. It's another way that we can replace it in line. Okay? So let's get the book content, the actual book content, which will be equal to display.innerHTML of display.innerHTML. Remember, we got the display right here. I'm pulling this in, and we want the inner HTML of file content. So we grab that, and what we want to do is mark the new content. So we're going to say new content equals book content dot replace. Oh my gosh. And I'm going to take my regular expression and I'm going to put my replace text in there. So it's going to take my regular expression here, and then it's going to take my replace text, and then my regular expression value will be inside here in the inner HTML in between the marks. So that's how that works, and it's going to return that as a string back to new content. So that marked every element. Add the mark to the book content. So that's pretty cool. And now all we have to do now is replace our content. So we can say display.innerHTML, and it's going to equal the new content. Okay, now to get the count, which I showed you on the screen, how many did we find? I can say count is document dot query selector all, and I'm going to look for everything that's called mark, like all that it found. Okay, and then from there I can get the length, because this is returning a list, and so the length will tell me how many items are in the list. Pretty cool. And so then once I have the count, I can go back to my get element by ID, and from here I can and it's going to be called search stat is what I called it. Dot enter HTML equals, and I'm using HTML in case I wanted to style this up a little more than I'm doing, but I thought about putting a bold tag in here, but I'm not. So I'm going to say found, and I'm just going to say plus count plus matches. Okay, and then a semicolon, close that out. Pretty cool. So then now we have it. So the last thing that I want to do is I want to scroll to the top. I want to scroll to the first element that I found. Okay, so that was the one thing that it did. So let's write an if statement, because we need to make sure that there's actually something to scroll to. If we didn't do this, it would throw an error if there were 0 matches. So if our count is greater than 0, I want to say var element, and then I want to say equals document dot get element by ID, and I want to look for the one called mark me. Now remember, up here we gave it the ID of mark me, so now it'll find all those with this ID. Okay, if you're doing this, make sure this is pretty unique in your document. Don't do something generic here. It'd find other mistakes here, but I think mark me is pretty unique to us. Okay, and then all we have to do now is element dot scroll into view, and it'll scroll to the first item that it finds here, and that's all we want it to do. Okay. And that should be all we need to do. And if it works, well, great. So let's check it out and see if this works. Okay. Before we do that, we need to do one more thing. Okay, so I forgot to wire up our front end. So let's take this perform mark here, and let's look at our index, and let's find our search button. So we're going to scroll through here, looking for our search button. There it is. And then this button right here, I can put an on click in here. I need to do that. It won't work. I'm going to put it in between. Well, I'm not doing well today. Okay, so I want to perform my mark there. Okay, now that we have that saved, let's just see if it works here. So I've got our site here, and let's click on Harry Potter. And you can see here we've got our most used words, our least used words, and our document stat. But one thing we may want to know is how many times is Dumbledore mentioned in this document, and this should tell us. If we type in our search term and look at there, found 160 times. and then it scrolled to the first occurrence of Dumbledore, and you notice that it is a case-insensitive search. If you want to do case-sensitive searches, you could just take the I off of our regular expression that we did. So that is the Notary, a coding project. We will release this in our GitHub. You can go to Coder Foundry, look for our GitHub on github.com. Also, leave some comments if you think of better ways or things you were confused about or things I messed up. We would love to interact with you to see if there's any way we can help you on your learning journey. Anyway, I hope that Notary is a coding project that you'll think about adding. And a couple of things that you may think about going forward, some things that you could take this to the next level, is you could add a paging here. That would be kind of cool if this paged around. Also, you could do search and replace and make this a code editor or something like that. Would be a cool project that you could do that would kind of follow on the same lines here. So you don't have to use books per se if you want to make your coding project. Make it your own, add to it, subtract from it. I hope you learned a lot. Anyway, I hope this helps. Good luck and keep coding.